Opposite Gloves here, and this is another video in the Harmor from the Ground Up tutorial series, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Image Resynthesis section in Harmor. This essentially turns Harmor into a sampler, but it lets you do some things that is way out there, very cool stuff, very unique to Harmor. As far as a full-blown sampler, I wouldn't call it that. Contact's more suited for a job like that, but this gives you some options that you just can't get anywhere. For example, I use it for vocals because it allows you to resynthesize vocals and just have a really clean, like the artifacts are substantially less noticeable. I like the sound of it a lot more. Sometimes I go for a vocoder to do something like that, but this is a phenomenal option. So what is the Image Resynthesis? Well, what you do is you could drop a picture or an audio file in here, and the audio file will be converted into a picture, and the picture will represent, or it will derive this from a picture you drop in here. I'm not going to drop a picture in here. It's kind of cool, but it's pretty easy. Just drop like a JPEG or something on it, and it will analyze it, and it will show you the harmonics, and you can from there alter your harmonics. You can alter the gain of the harmonics. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have a cello pack here, and from my website, and here we have a cello, and we've dropped it in there, and as you can see, the gain has been shown ascending, and so these are the time. This is time, the x-axis, and then upwards is our harmonic structure, and you see we've been given these points here. Okay, so this first point represents the normalization level, so the average level, so you can apply normalization that way. And you also have this time stretching formant option, which provides a crossfade with the sample itself, so it'll relap over itself. So that could be an interesting thing to mess with. Now the plane, as you can see, each one of these harmonics, what it's done is it's analyzed the file and said, oh, these frequencies are active, and it's resynthesized it using Harmor's own frequency index, and it says, oh, these ones are active, and so the partials are turning on and off. This is the gain, so this is the white is the partial is on, and then as you can see it fades out and turns on. And because the 516 harmonics are able to do this, it creates a really realistic sounding sample. Now this is only the gain technically. If you want to see the frequency index, this is the frequency index, and this shows us the frequencies somewhat along the same principles. I rarely look at this field. They also have a combined field which allows you to see both, but I usually just end up looking at the gain. Now you see it's also set up a looping region for us. We may or may not want this. That's what this red curve is. You can also set it up so that it duplicates and relapses over itself just by holding control and clicking and dragging. And it also alters where our time is. So first, so we've selected a region here. So yes, so let's go ahead and reset this, and let's talk about these knobs over here. I'm going to come over here in a little bit. These are a little more, these are like a whole nother universe, so we're going to talk about that after some of the more basic things. I'm going to show you what I do. A lot of this is just kind of touching it and see what happens. Some of these knobs will do very little, if anything, to one picture or image, and then they'll do like a crap ton to another image, and I'm going to stick to just one example. So obviously I encourage you to drop samples in here and do stuff, because you could turn pretty much anything into almost anything else. Like, it's kind of like unreal. This is amazing for bass resynthesis and stuff. So we have this smoothing option. What that is sometimes we have sharp images, sharp transients, and smoothing can change that over for us. It should be noted. So okay, so there's a different, mathematically speaking, we have a few separate options when we're dealing with something that is got this many options. And the first one is we have this gain. Well, we can influence how the gain is interpolated between samples. So that's pretty powerful. The other option we have, if we come over here to the frequency index, is we can influence how the frequency is interpolated between the samples. And because this is technically no longer audio data, but is a frequency domain data, we have all these knobs as a result. And so what each one of these knobs influences some aspect of that interpolating. I hope that made sense. So we have smoothing, which alters the gain interpolating. So I believe it will preserve our transients, but most of these knobs I end up setting by ear anyways. So we have smoothing. You can turn that on and off. It will smooth out clicks and pops. if you have any. I've never really had any, but if you do, it'll smooth them out small scale. It will still allow you to do large leaps, so you can still have transients. You have this C and this F. This stands for coarse speed, and this is fine speed. So what is that? So as we play our sample, we can adjust how quickly it moves across. You see this line here represents where our current playback is. And we have it on a retriggering mode right now. But as we play it, we can adjust it. You can go backwards, forwards. And so that's pretty interesting. And what's cool is you can do this in real time, which is a really powerful tool. Another option we have here is this coarse speed. This is relative to your fine speed. So you set your fine speed, and then you can adjust it by smaller. I believe this is a multiplier to this fine speed if this doesn't give you enough control. So that is another option you have available to you. The time is just where we start our playback in the sample. So right now this is set to 0, but we can come over here and you see our red line moves, and this is now our sample starts there, there. And this is an infinitely rotating line. If you want to get it back to the 0 value, just hold Alt and click to do that easily. So that's what these knobs do. Now we have this looping option. So this is very important. Right now it's in loop mode. So it comes to the front and it just goes through a loop. Like, it's pretty intuitive. But then we have these other options. We have one shot. So it'll play our sample data once and then just stop. And so it's all done playing. It says cool beans. And now we have our loop option, which we were just doing. And then we have ping pong. Ping pong, this is pretty common throughout a lot of synthesis and mini DAWs. What it is you can go forwards, and when it reaches the end of the envelope, it'll go backwards through the same content. So that could be something really cool that you may be interested in doing. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it on ping pong, maybe looping. I don't know. And so those are some options we have here. Now we have this sharp. This has to do with the transient. So sometimes images will have very sharp, like in drum loops, for example. But this is another thing that sometimes you don't hear it doing anything at all. And then especially with smoothing, that's another knob that's sort of like that. And then other times it makes a really large difference. So something you want to look for. Ideally, as you turn it up, it'll make your image more clear by, I believe it just has a color and contrast. Theoretically, that's what I think it's doing, but it's supposed to make your image more clear so that your transients are sharper. And I believe right is just sharpness overall, and then the left is sharpness with the phase, following the phase moves. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. That's sort of a more advanced thing. But sharpness could play a role in just making your image clearer or more blurry. So that is what these do. As you can see, I don't hear like a huge difference here. But that tends to be how it is most of the time. Sometimes I'm just messing with it, and all of a sudden it does like a huge thing. I'm like, whoa, I didn't expect that. So we were talking earlier about how we have a few options to interpolate between gain or interpolate between the frequency domain. And here we've got, by the way, frequency domain just means all the frequencies we're allowed to have. So if you're not familiar with that type of a term. So we have level options here. So this allows us to mess with the interpolation of the gain between pixels. So remember, this is taking pixel data. It's as if you're familiar with like sampling and holding and all that, and DSP and stuff like that, this is essentially taking the data from pixels instead of a voltage reading. So it's kind of interesting. And so we can do block, cubic, cap, and these are all just different options for interpolating data. I can't give you like exact algorithms on how they decided to do this, but this is something you mess with. You will notice changes like rise and fall, I believe, has a tendency to only input increasing values. And the scale just applies like a positive scale or a negative scale. So how much this algorithm is impacted onto our data, and then we can mix it in with the original or not. So that's kind of an interesting option we have here. Turning the mix down is interesting because I think theoretically, I honestly don't know what the backup image is. Because if you're turning the mix down off of, oh wait, you're going back to the original. What am I talking about? Okay, so we have fall. So anyways, those are some options. You're going to want to send them by ear. They may not have huge differences between them, but they might. So like, who knows? All right. So now we have frequency. So now this is interpolating our frequency differently as opposed to our gain. And you see the image does not change when we make these changes. So that's important to note. Now we have frequency, we have cubic, bell, cap, all the same shapes, the same algorithms, only this time they augment how closely related our frequencies are. And so the scale of that, and then form is formants. So how much of the resonance. So you know when we're talking, we have unusual formants in our voice. Some frequencies stand out even though they are not the fundamental. And so it's whenever a partial or harmonic is, or overtone. I guess those are all sort of, they're different things. But, and I play on the formants will influence that. If you're not familiar with formants, I have a few videos on my channel about it. But this will introduce formants or remove it. But keep in mind, this has to do with frequency domain. So this is sort of a gain coloration knob versus the scale, which is influencing how the actual frequencies interact. Now we have a few options here. We have octave mode, which is a linear scale, hertz mode, wide hertz, which is just a more accentuated hertz mode, basically a harder scale. And then we have unison, which links this, I believe it's a scale knob, to the pitch variation on the unison. So if you turn on unison while you're doing stuff here, which is like, yeah, once you get through all this, you have the rest of Harmor to mess with. Like, it's freaking nuts what you can do. As you can see, we turn on hertz, it really begins to affect our sound. So the formants in the mix. Now, hertz. So these make big impacts. The unison, if we turn our unison on. So a bunch of really interesting options we have here. So that is what these things are. Now, octave is a linear mode, which is why that comes out so funky sounding. So that's what these knobs are. These are the knobs. I decided to start with these because these are kind of the ones that people reach for and touch first. And so it's kind of nice to have some sort of an idea of what they're doing to your sound. Now, you'll notice up here we have our two view modes. We have an octave mode, which is a linear scale, and our hertz mode again. And again, gain, I feel like, is a little more useful for this type of a thing. I tend to keep it on hertz mode. We've talked about that. Okay, so now we have all these additional options over here. I believe I talked about this is normalizing. So if we play, this will influence the normalization of the data inside our set. So let's talk about this whole deal right here. So we right now have a loop set up with these red points that's crossfading between another. It's duplicating our sample data and bringing it up to the back. But this is right now just looping that section, right? So maybe we don't want that. What you could do is you could do clear all, and oh, that gets rid of your picture too. I should have guessed that. It's clear all. So anyways, yeah, so clear all will delete all that, apparently. I thought it would just get rid of your loop. To set up a loop, you could just hit Control-click again, and it will do that for you. And you can set up a loop. You'll also see that this will influence where your time is. If you just select the whole thing, it'll just leave your sample alone as it was. And you have your same options as before. You can bring in a... This is interesting. But okay, so we have prepare time envelope. So prepare time envelope associates with the playback of this sample its speed. So essentially these speeds, it'll associate it with an envelope. And so here we've created an envelope that's a linear relationship, 1-to-1. And as you see, it included our looping here. So this is the loop. This is the amount of time it takes to play through it at regular, and then this is going backwards. So this is our speed turning on and off, backwards and forwards. And we can actually augment these values by just augmenting the graph, as you can see. Or you can also modulate, or not modulate, automate your attack, decay, sustain, and release. But in order to move these, which I did not explain in envelope video, but I figure you'd be able to figure it out. But if you right click, you have to set something to be your decay so that attack has something to be relative to. So if you don't understand what I'm talking about, go watch the videos on envelopes. But now you see we can move it relative to the decay and automate that. This could be a really powerful tool with something similar to a drum loop. So you could drop a drum loop in here and do some pretty incredible stuff. So that's that. We have create bouncing time loop envelope. So occasionally you may have, or maybe not occasionally, maybe you have a whole bunch of wave files that have markers in them. So some files can have, like drum loops can have markers that allow them to adapt to tempo regardless of the tempo change. The markers will tell it where the transients are, and it can, so you could drop drum loops in there without having to worry about the speed your tempo's at with that particular drum loop, which is really nice. Once you have that, it's kind of annoying going back to the way old drum loops are where they don't have that. So that's called saved acidized if you want to do further research on that. But Harmor can realize this by creating bouncing loop time envelopes. You can click that and it will create a time envelope relative to those loops so that you can loop things. This image does not have that, so I don't do that. We have slowdown within loop region. So we could set up a loop and we could create this is the image find speed, which is the envelope for this control right here, the speed, and we can slow it down. So what we've just done is we've created in our envelope, we've created a command to tell it to slow down over time. So this is like regular speed right here, and you can augment this as well, just like any other envelope. So that is a pretty interesting thing. I'm going to turn this off. And yeah, so you have extensive control over your timing of these types of things. Now imagine putting that to an LFO, which is actually what they did with the template for vocal resynthesis for linking a vocal to Harmor. It's like a whole nother subject though, but this is, now you're starting to get the idea of where they came up with these ideas. And these controls are, I think, underused. A lot of people probably don't know what they do or how to use them. We have tune pitch for time offset. So if your timing offset for whatever reason is different, you can use this tune pitch time offset. And that has to do again with the timing offset. So here are all your image resynthesis options. We have the time offset option, which is what we were just messing with. And by manipulating that, you got the tune pitch time offset deal. You have image find speed, image formants shift, so you can control the formants knob on that page and the frequency pixel scale using all the options we have here. And we've talked about that pretty extensively, so I'm not going to go through and explain envelopes and stuff. We have tune pitch, set viewed region as loop region, so you can zoom in on a section. Say this is like this section you want looped, but you don't want to, the whole control click thing might be like annoying. So you could just put set, this is my loop region, and bang, that has now been set as your loop region. Pretty nice. You have set last played zone as a loop region. So zone can mean a number of things. In this case, the amount of space we just played, like if I just barely hit it, this space from here to here is my last played zone, just the last playback I just played. You can set that to be your repeat, and bang, you have that. So that is some pretty interesting options. We have map time offset to last hit key. Okay, so what this is, let's say you've got, okay, so we have this, and we want to map pieces of this sample to our keyboard so that we can trigger them back, sort of like a drum kit. So we can hit, like, let's say we want, let's set this back to 0. So we want this to be associated with this key. So we're going to go map time offset to this last hit key. And so there it is. So we'll hit another key and we'll move our time. And we'll associate that with our last hit key. And now watch. So that's that one. And then if I hit this note, it'll go back to our first one. Now, this is not exactly the best example. I have some downloaded samples. Let's get one of those. Project files. Here we go. So this is a thing. Some vocals. And so here we have our. So this has been associated. You should know what just happened based on everything I just said. So we're going to set last play zone to loop region. I mean, not that. We're going to set the time offset to this. So here we go. So that's been associated. We'll move this. And let's associate that with that. And we can come over here and do another one. We could associate map time offset to last hit key. So now we have 3 time offsets mapped. So you could do that for your whole sample and create some pretty dynamic changes. And you could even get it so the pitch stays the same throughout if you want, through the use of the time shifting and all that sort of jazz, so that your keyboard doesn't influence that. So that's what these options are. So these are some pretty important options. We have our analyze audio, just another way to get a file into here. And then we have convert to image synthesis mode. This will open up a whole bunch more options for editing. The deal is though, so this is sort of an advanced thing. It may or may not matter to you. If you're going to do this, it generally doesn't. But right now, we have all our phase relationships as they're changing. All our phase is changing with our frequency index and everything. It's great. This is like the most, we have a lot of fidelity here with this. It's very realistic sounding. But if we go to convert to image synthesis mode, which we cannot change after we've done it, you see it turns gray. This indicates that, first of all, the change has taken place. And now our phase relationships are locked. So we no longer, through our editing and other options, we do not have the ability to change them. They are locked in place. And so this can degrade our quality. You may not hear a degradation right now, which is sort of a testament to how good Harmor is. But as you begin to edit, your editing will become less and less realistic. Now we have these other map audio to keys, regions, add points. I've never used these options, and they're grayed out right now. But they do pretty much what they indicate they do based on what I showed you earlier. And that can allow you to just map keys. Say you have a drum loop and you want to just break it up. You could use those options. But like I just said, I've never used them. So I'm not exactly qualified to use them. But we have over here, well, I'm not qualified to explain how to use them. We have over here a whole bunch of additional options that have just popped up. So these right now, these are dealing with the gain side of things. So we have generate random cloud, or this might be the pitch. I can't remember right now, but we have generate random cloud. And what it does is it just generates, it randomizes our gain. And our frequency, I believe, stays the same. So not exactly the most desirable of options. And you kind of can't undo it once you've done it. So we're just dropping in. So when you touch that, be careful with it. You have degrade horizontally and degrade vertically. This has to do with, again, with playback speed. So vertically, obviously, is gain and frequency. This horizontally is playback speed. So if you degrade it, it'll just move things around. So these are just additional options you have for messing with stuff. You have crossfade. Crossfade will take the sample and crossfade it over itself. And so in a long time coming. So that's a pretty interesting option we have here. We have crop top. So that'll just, as you see, our high frequency goes, sort of dies away. And then we have open image, save image file, edit image. So you can actually open these in an image editor of your choice, save it, and import it back into Harmor and mess with it further. So it's kind of interesting because it turns audio files into pictures. So you can do some weird things, probably using additional visual filters in like Photoshop or something. Copy image to clipboard, paste image from clipboard. So you can easily go back and forth. You don't have to like keep saving your file to a file and then copying it. You could just save your image straight from your editor. We have clear, which will clear our picture. We have invert. So invert right now we know that the white is frequencies that are active and gain that is active. If black is not, well, we can invert it. And now, as you can see, everything else is active. This might sound horrible. So that's some interesting options. I'm going to invert it back so it plays back normal. And then we have flip vertical. So it'll just flip your image literally upside down. Can sound very scary and demonic. So that's a pretty cool options. That's pretty much everything. You also have additional copy and paste buttons up here. And I believe I already talked about these are just different view modes. That is everything you really need to know about this. Now, there's a whole bunch of additional options. If you come up here to your presets, you go to tutorials, template, you have these time stretching options. Now, what they've done, so if we turn this on, we could drop an image in here. Ideally, it's something that's 4 bars to the tempo of your song, and you've done whatever editing, usually monotone, so you could play a melody onto here. They have a whole thing about vocal resynthesis. What this does is they've linked up the playback of this. See how I can play multiple notes? Well, what they've activated legato, which you should know what that is, and so you could sort of deduce what they've done here. You see we have our image time offset, image format shift, and pitch all active. And we've got things mapped. Well, this is sort of telling. And as you play back, you can influence things. Another one uses an LFO to create some interesting harmonic options, because you can hit multiple notes at the same time by triggering different LFO controller signals. So it's just really interesting what they've done here. Definitely worth further research and reading, but that's what the controls do as an overall basis. As you can see, this is like, I'm not even going to demo it because it's so unrealistically like powerful. Like, it's ridiculous. You can stick almost anything in here and do anything with it. As far as creating like a realistic violin sound from here, like a violin library, I suppose you could if you get enough harmors and do enough stuff with it. But that's kind of like, you'd want an actual sampler for that. But this gives you some really cool synthetic options. You can, as you saw, I dropped the vocals in here. It sounded pretty good. Another quick tip: if you go over here to the Advanced tab, you can take your precision and ramp it up to perfect, and you'll get an even higher fidelity image. May or may not be something you want. That's what that is. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. Subscribe because you are a blessed individual, and have a blessed day.